And we are going to read the questions, the relevant questions, so that that's written right into the record, since the recording does not capture the questions in the chat. You can also unmute yourself and ask a question to the presenters. I'm going to take a little bit of liberty this morning by sharing a little short presentation with everyone to announce an initiative that the local government center is starting. So I'm going to share my screen. Got a little PowerPoint. Maybe I'm going to share my screen. Here we go. Screen one. All right, we'll do it this way. Can you see that?
Not yet.
Not yet. All right. Maybe I'll have to do this at the end, figure out what's going on here. Huh. I don't know why it's not showing up now. It showed up earlier. Bear with me just one more second. It's tough to have dead space on these calls, isn't it?
Eric shakes his head no. I think he's good with it.
There it is. All right, I found it. Too many things open on my screen at one time. Can you see this now?
Yep, looks good.
And if I launch it, what happens?
We see your presenter view.
As you would imagine, right? Sharing content from the monitor, experience participants.
If you pick display settings at the top and swap screens, it should set you straight.
All right. Well, let's just look at the presenters. So let me do this. Golly. You send these people to school, you buy them books, and it just doesn't seem to pan out all the time. You stop sharing. Stop sharing. Back to this. All right, I apologize. Bear with me. We're almost there. And if not, we're just going to punt. Now do you see it?
Nope,
No?
we're just going to go with presenter view.
Oh, God. All right, so here we go. Here's the challenge that we've been facing here at the local government center is there is a tremendous amount of demand for our services. And we love providing support and help and training to all you folks out there across the state. But we're trying to balance our time and given the demand that exists. And so what we've decided to do is rather than waiting for you folks around in the counties to call up, which is kind of a random occurrence, you'll call us up and say, hey, can you come and do a training for our public boards? We love doing public board training, a board leadership training. We love doing that, but it's a challenge to be able to fit that into our schedule. So we've decided that we're going to flip the script on you and say, look, if you want to have a board training, here are the days that we're going to be available. So we want to define more clearly when we will come out. So that way we can leverage our travel around the state and get a bunch of counties trained all at one time. And so Ashley Kent, who's our associate specialist, our associate director, and myself have been working the last couple of weeks. We've been reaching out to the county extension agents. Let me see if I can change my screen here. County extension agents to help support this effort so they can help you in reaching out to all these different districts, contacting them, and helping with logistics, scheduling a location. So we're looking to have the county offices help us schedule these board trainings in your counties. So here are all the different boards that could benefit. And this is not, by the way, an exhaustive list. This is just what we quickly brainstormed and wrote out on this slide. But there is a tremendous amount of boards out there that need training. If you're not providing the training for them, and we're not providing the training for them, they're likely not getting any training. And that does create kind of a risk for you as districts may and boards may not be following the law and policies as they should be. So the topics that we would cover in these trainings would be principles of good governance, roles and responsibilities of the board, their relationship with the commission, open meeting laws, citizen participation law, how to close a meeting appropriately for an executive session, what is the board member liability for serving on a board, effective meetings. You can kind of see the list there, and we'll mix and match depending on what that particular group would like to learn. But those are the basic topics that we'll cover. We don't cover specifics about, say, what does the weed district do, but we cover how does the weed district operate? How do they conduct themselves as a public board? And then allow them to then work with the county to figure out what specifics they can do as a board. Each board training that we'll offer will have a price tag of $750. That includes travel. So no matter where your county is at in the state, we will come out $750. And what that gives you is up to 4 hours of training, unlimited participation. You can have the, a room. I was just there, Joe Briggs in Cascade County a couple of weeks ago, and we had about 80 people in the room, and we did a training for them. We can do a hybrid option if you want. We'll provide all the handouts, and we'll even give you templates for a press release, materials to send out, email out to your board members. So we want to make this as easy as possible for you to be able to communicate to your board members to show up at a training and get trained. Some of you will have us come out once a year, some twice a year, and some every other year. And that's fine. What we're trying to do is figure out how do we control the scheduling on that, rather than it just being random, a call, and we try to fit you in our schedule. So what you can do is you can either reach out to us and schedule a training. We have some scheduled 16 slots for this fall and another 30 slots for next spring. So if you can reach out to us directly, or you can contact your county extension agent and say, hey, we would like to have a board training. Can you get that started? And then allow that county agent to contact us, and we will work with them in scheduling it and helping them with the logistics. We're open to doing it whichever way works best in your county. But if you're interested, I know some of the counties haven't had a board training in many years, if at all, and we'd love to come to your county and work with your boards to help them meet their statutory and constitutional requirements. Here's our contact information, and we'll be adding that to the chat here in a few minutes. But that's, we just want to share that with you. Feel free to contact us. We'll love to get you on our schedule and work with your boards. Make sure we have good governance from the top to the bottom in your county. So there you go. I am going to stop sharing. Oof. Took me more time to get this thing set up than it did to actually share with you. So there you are, ladies and gentlemen. Let us know if you've got any questions in the chat. And with that, I think I'm going to turn the time over to Eric.
Thank you, Dan. But first, we should see if there's any questions related to.
Yeah.
Anybody want to pepper in with questions?
And I'm going to put you on the spot, Joe. Did you feel that training we did a couple of weeks ago was worthwhile?
Dan, I think the training's always worthwhile. That's why we like to have you do it every year. It varies from board to board. Some don't attend. Some attend and actually listen, and others will sit in the corner and grouse to each other. But all you can do is offer the training. Dan does a really good job of trying to tune the training to the questions that people reference at the beginning of it. So yeah, I think it's an appropriate investment.
Yeah. Great. Thanks. So just consider that a Yelp review from Joe.
One additional comment, Dan, because in the last legislative session and really the two previous, there's been a lot of discussion about training and opportunities for volunteer board members. It came to a head almost last session with some compulsory training requirements delivered by the local government center at MSU, and that bill got mired up at the very end. But I expect more bills like that to come in the next session. I would encourage you guys, when you're setting up these trainings or coordinating with Dan, and your extension agents when they get set up, please extend an invitation to your House and Senate members, even if it's just to let them know that we're training going on. I'd like to see some of them attend. I'm even up in the Cascade area. If Representative Steve Gist was there, he's one that's got a particular interest in trying to find a way to either coerce or incentivize board training for volunteers. Extend the invitation to your local elected officials, all of them, including your House and Senate members, just to see, like I said, they'll either come or they won't, but even if they don't come, they'll know that that training is ongoing, and that'll help us all in future elections.
And I'll just add to that. I've been spending the last couple of days on the road with the League of Cities and Towns and with some state legislators, and that was it was interesting how many of them, their perception is that local government's kind of falling apart. They're not following the rules, and I asked them and pushed on them a little bit, saying, "Well, can you give me some specifics? You know, in a way, how do we help fix the problem if we've got problems out there?" And not one of them could tell me specifically where local government's breaking down, but it's just a narrative that they have, I think, in the Capitol, that local government is out of control with no specific source that they can point to. So I think things like this would help. You know, if we can at least show at home we're doing things well and properly, and we're getting the people's business done effectively, I think we can be a great example of those folks in Helena.
Agreed.
So I'm done. Thank you.
Transitioning on, if you think of more questions, you can pepper with Dan or to Dan at the end of this. I do want to introduce Tara Depew. She's here to break the ARPA streak and talk about something besides ARPA, which then we'll circle back to at the end. But with that, I'm going to give the floor over to Tara.
Good afternoon. I just wanted to talk briefly today about one of the land use bills that came out of the 2021 session, and then a recent court ruling that just came out of Yellowstone County. So first of all, I'm just going to share my screen. Can everybody see that? This was a handout that was in your packets for district meetings. I wasn't able to attend all of your district meetings, so I just wanted to reference this because it's a really good handout that tells you what bills applied to land use, when they were effective, what type of land use they applied to, and then just a short summary. But there's a hyperlink in this this table for all of the bills. So if you were interested in looking at House Bill 259, which prohibits inclusionary zoning, you could just click on the hyperlink and you would be able to see the bill. So I'm just plugging that. If you don't have that, please just email me at attorney@riverworks.net and I'll be sure to send that to you. So I got to stop sharing and I want to go to my other screen I want to talk about. So I think one of the biggest pieces of legislation that we need to be aware of, and now it won't let me share, of course. Share. Did it come up? Is Senate Bill 174. And so I will go to the top of this so you can see this. Senate Bill 174 is a bill that deals with conditions for subdivision review. And why I think this bill is something I wanted to talk about, and I know I sent out, there was a newsletter for this. I've talked with planners about this. We did trainings with the planners and the city and county attorneys right after the session. But what it really has done is that if you don't follow the new requirements for imposing conditions in subdivision review, what happens is you're going to be challenged as being unlawful. Normally we talk about your decisions for subdivisions being arbitrary and capricious, and they really have to challenge you on how you made your decision. But now with Senate Bill 174, if you don't meet all of the standards for imposing conditions, you have violated state statute and your decision is unlawful, and you're definitely going to be reversed on that decision. So I just want to make sure everybody understands that moving forward, we have to be very careful on how we impose conditions in subdivision review. There's a few other things the bill did. It does not allow governments to approve the governing documents for subdivisions, so their bylaws, their articles of incorporation. It does allow you to approve their covenants if during the subdivision review process, you've imposed conditions that have to show up in their covenants. The other thing the bill does is it states that if you haven't enforced a condition of final plat approval in the subdivision against other people in the subdivision, and then all of a sudden you decide you want to start enforcing it, you can't do that. And that's going to be a little bit problematic because you're not always going to know that there were other violations in the subdivision before you take enforcement actions. So it's going to be, I think, critical that before you take enforcement in a subdivision that you look to see if there's other violations that also need to have an enforcement action, or even better, make sure that all the conditions are completed before final plat approval and you have nothing to enforce after final plat approval. It doesn't always work that way, but that would be a great goal. So one of the things that the bill did, Senate Bill 174, is it has really tied us to the primary review criteria when we're imposing conditions. So those criteria are your impact on agricultural water user facilities, natural environment, local services, and all of those. But now you have to show that your conditions are specific, documentable, and clearly defined as they relate to the primary review criteria. So the meat of the change in the statutes is in 620. And I really can't say that this is any different than the process you should have always been doing, but now we have it in statute, which is what concerns me, because if you don't do it, then you're going to be challenged for being unlawful. So when you're doing your conditions, you have to provide those to the applicant. You have to make them available to the public. You have to provide your appeal process. You have to identify regulations and statutes that you use to reach your decision in imposing conditions and explain how they apply. You have to provide facts and conclusions that you relied upon in making the decisions, and you have to reference documents, testimony, or other materials that form the basis of the decision. And you have to identify the conditions that apply to preliminary plat approval. So what this basically means is almost all of you are getting really good staff reports that set forth, conditions for you to consider. Planners are going to be providing you how they got to that condition. And planning boards will be doing this, but it's going to sort of limit your ability to, on the fly, impose a new condition when it comes before you as county commissioners, unless you can go back and cross all these T's and dot all these I's. So I had put out to the planners sort of some sample staff reports that would make sure that they were crossing all those T's and dotting all those I's. And so you can see here, like for natural environment, you put up here what you say in your growth policy. You have your recommended findings. You have to reference your statute or subdivision regulation, where it came from. Here's your recommended conditions. If it's a covenant, you're highlighting it. And then you have to put over in this column on the far right, what documents in the record supports that finding or condition. Now, not all of you are getting your staff reports in this table format. I love this table format because I'm very visual and I can just easily see, here's the finding, here's the condition to mitigate the finding, here's what supported it, here's the statute or the regulation that it's based on. But I also did sort of a more narrative type of staff report that planners use. So if you want to impose new conditions when you've gotten to your subdivision review process before the county commission, make sure you have your planner involved and they're helping you cross all the T's and dot all the I's, because otherwise, to me, if you don't connect all the dots, you're running a red flag up the pole that says, we did it wrong, you can sue us, and we're going to have to either redo the subdivision approval process, or what the district courts have done a lot lately is they have just basically revoked the subdivision. And that concerns me because then you may have liability from the subdivider if they think you did it wrong and they have damages. So that's just my Senate Bill 174 little primer. I think all of your planners and your deputy county attorneys and city attorneys are on top of this, but just make sure that you're aware that you have to be careful now in imposing conditions to meet all the requirements of Senate Bill 174. So I'm going to go away from that, stop sharing my screen. I want to talk a little bit about, and I'm going to forget the name of the case again because it's just not sticking in my head. Do I have it up? I don't know. Well, there was a case just out of Yellowstone County on Part 1 zoning. It did involve a gravel pit, I believe. And, you know, gravel pits never go away in our lives. But what happened, and I guess, I don't know if John Oslin is on. I'm not surprised this happened. There it is, Ruckstead. Thank you, Eric. We have now had a district court find that the protest provisions for Part 1 zoning are unconstitutional. That happened with Part 2 zoning, the county imposed zoning in 2013 in the Williams case. The protest provisions for county imposed zoning, the Part 2, and the citizen initiated zoning for Part 1 were similar. So I guess it was always my concern and my opinion that if we had a challenge on the Part 1 zoning protest provisions, they would be found unconstitutional based on Williams, and that's exactly what just happened. And the reason they're unconstitutional based on the Williams case is that there's no legislative override. What the courts are basically saying is that you as county commissioners are giving citizens your legislative powers to protest and do away with a zoning district, and that you as county commissioners should have some sort of legislative override to be able to say, no, we really need to create this district because of health, public safety, whatever it is. What's also problematic about the Williams case, and it shows up in the Ruckstead decision as well, is they are basically saying that you need to have guidance provisions for protests. And I have never found in another state where there are any criteria for why you can protest a zoning act. Normally protests are because they just don't like it, right? They just don't want it. But what the Supreme Court said in Williams is that you have to have some criteria for why people are making their protests. And I have looked since 2011 for some sort of other state that had those type of criteria, so we would know we weren't just making up criteria that would be challenged and we would lose it on it, and I could never find it. So what we did with Part 2 zoning in this session in Senate Bill 292 is we specifically put a referendum provision into county imposed zoning, the Part 2, as sort of the fix for not having a protest. I don't know what's going to happen with Part 1 with the Ruckstead decision and whether there is going to, Eric's chatting at me, so I have to read what he's saying. Yeah, the legislature would have to provide that guidance. It would need to be in statute. I don't know if they're going to appeal, so we have a little while to watch and see what happens. But just know that when a district court finds a provision of state statute unconstitutional, it has statewide ramifications. It's just not something that affects Yellowstone County. So right now, until we have a Supreme Court decision that says something contrary, and my gut feeling is we're not going to get a contrary opinion out of the Montana Supreme Court, we've lost protests for Part 1 zoning. I think that will make it even more critical when county commissioners are deciding whether they're going to allow the creation of that district, whether or not it has met the requirements of being in the public interest and convenience. Those are the words in Part 1 zoning. It's very archaic. I have no idea what public interest and convenience means, and we've never gotten a decision on that. But buyer beware, if you're doing Part 1 zoning, there's no protest, which will probably make your citizens not very happy. So if you have questions about that, I'd be glad to try to answer. Great, nobody has questions.
I do. You on the chat, I'm going to ask a couple of these out loud. Procedurally, if a county was still interested in trying to, or processing a Part 1 zoning application, the protest provisions are still in law. They're not going to be applicable. So you go through that protest, you recognize that it either did or didn't meet the threshold. And then in deliberations, you just toss it out and the governing body still gets to deliberate and make its own decision.
No, I mean, what I was telling counties with Part 2 zoning when we lost the protest is have a public comment period. After you've decided to create the district, instead of calling it a protest, because we don't have protests, have a public comment period. And then you as county commissioners can review all of that public comment and decide whether you want to still move forward with that district. But I think if you call it a protest and then the citizens figure out they don't have that protest power, they're going to be very unhappy with you. So call it a public comment period, give them as much comment as you can. I was recommending that if you got stuck in this Part 1 protest issue, to try to convert Part 1 to a Part 2 zoning district and just do it as county imposed. But you can choose, you need to talk with your county attorney's office. The other thing is you can still do a referendum. The citizens can still do a referendum for Part 1 zoning, but it's going to be difficult because it's the entire county, including the city, that's involved in the referendum process. We have an AG's opinion that says even the cities can be involved in a referendum on a zoning decision. So they have to go get 15% of the entire population of the city and the county to even get that on the ballot. And then once they do that, everybody gets to vote. That did happen with a Part 1 zoning district in Flathead County. Was it Flathead? Yeah, it was Flathead. It was Egan Slough. And the issue was whether or not they should expand a Part 1 district. They put it on, the commissioners were not in favor of doing that. They put it on as an initiative, and it was, the voters approved expanding that Part 1 district basically because there was a very large water bottling plant being proposed right next to an existing Part 1 zoning district. So you still have referendum, but it's more difficult to use for Part 1.
And then finally, for me, Tara, how do you deal with proposed zone map amendments or changes in this Part 1 zoning district that might trigger something that's like another public comment appeal or process?
So the Part 1 zoning statutes don't have really a process for amending your district. So what we've advised everybody and what counties have done is they've just gone through the same process that you would use to create it. So again, you're not going to have a protest if you're amending your existing Part 1 zoning district. Do public comment periods, 30-day public comment periods, and then be very cognizant of what your public is telling you.
Any questions for Tara?
Okay, great.
Thank you, Tara. I'm sure as this sinks in, there'll be more discussion and conversations coming. And you're still out doing updates, road shows, providing advice and guidance to planners and county attorneys, correct?
I am, and I just yesterday asked the Montana Association of Planners to send out the Bruckstead decision out of Yellowstone County. So I'm sure that we'll be talking about it a lot more.
And for the record, there's been a request essentially from Yellowstone County to see if MACo is interested in encouraging or joining in or talking about an appeal, and we'll continue to evaluate it. But as Tara said, that it's essentially settled on Montana under Part 2. It's the same criteria for Part 1. I don't know that it is appealable, and I don't know that we're going to do anything other than get ready for the next legislative session to try and put the onus back on the legislature to define that review criteria and give guidance on how we can keep doing zoning as needed between now and then. All right. I did put Tara's email address in the chat box if you want to get a hold of her directly and ask any follow-up questions. While we have some time remaining, I do want to give an update on ARPA. As many of you know, the competitive grant program that was created by House Bill 632 had its application deadline of July 15th. So the first application deadline for the competitive grant on water and wastewater has closed. Those applications were due, and the process for review is still likely going to include some public comment or public hearings in front of that advisory committee. The statute set up a process where the advisory committee had to review, rank, and recommend to the governor's office funding of those proposals under that competitive grant program. So if you applied, I strongly encourage you to attend in person or virtually the committee hearings where after staff submits it to the committee does the actual work of ranking, reviewing, and recommending funding. Your participation in those hearings, if you apply, to be really important. Think of it kind of traditionally as the TSEP process, where you show up and you, after you've even submitted your application, you're making the case for why you need to be funded. I encourage you to do that. If you applied on behalf of another entity, it's entirely up to you whether you want to participate or not, but encourage even potential sub-recipients that you might have sponsored their application for to attend those meetings when they get scheduled. Nothing has been scheduled yet, but I expect them to be coming soon. You saw, hopefully, we sent out notice about the Economic Transformation and Stabilization Workforce Development Advisory Commission. That's different than the local government funding one, but you can see from the agenda, they're scheduled to meet July 21st in an all-day meeting to review and discuss the state requested projects. So everything from workforce development presentations to requests that are coming from Department of Commerce for projects that they want with federal ARPA funds that state agencies are applying for. If you're interested in seeing how that process is going to work, tune into that one. There'll be a virtual option or an in-person option. And again, that's Wednesday, July 21st at 9 a.m. And the draft agenda is buried in that link that we sent out by email. What the state refers to as minimum allocation grants, that's the formula that House Bill 632 carved out and set aside for each city, town, and county. That application opened on July 15th. So the guidance is a little squishy at this point. You can start applying for that minimum allocation grant process, and there's that, I think it's roughly 26-page checkbox, mostly yes or no answer process to apply for your minimum allocation grants for, again, water and wastewater. And that cycle remains open between July 15th and January 1st of 2023. So you don't have to, there's not a need to feel like you need to apply and get after that money right away. It's essentially reserved for your use. And they'll continue to screen those applications as they get them and move forward. For the same reason, if you're applying for your minimum allocation grants and they hold hearings or public meetings or in any way convene that group to review, rank, and recommend, you got to participate in those meetings, even if it's just virtually, to be able to advocate for projects that you submitted for your minimum allocation grants. I want to talk reporting really briefly. But first, before I do that, know that we're still communicating with, both directly and through the National Association, with the U.S. Treasury on the interim final rules. Montana Association of Counties submitted a pretty lengthy comment in the comment section to try and address some greater flexibility and a better and clearer understanding of allowable uses received.
And
those are the direct allocation, not the money that
talk to the fire chiefs before he.
You're coming over this thing.
Yeah.
You should be good, Eric. Oh, but now you're muted.
Now I'm good. What I was saying is that anybody can talk over me anytime they want. I probably won't even stop talking when you do it. My point being, those of you that received your direct allocations, the money directly from Treasury, have some obligations in terms of reporting. That is getting clearer, and there are 3 categories of entities that have to comply with the reporting requirements. And again, this is the money directly from U.S. Treasury. None of the large jurisdictional reporting requirements apply to anybody in Montana, so I'm going to skip those entirely. but it's about the amount of money that you receive and populations. So if you have a population below 250,000 and you receive more than 5 million in ARPA funds, you have interim reporting and project expenditure reporting and the deadlines that'll follow along with those two. For low population centers that received under $5 million, your reporting requirements are slightly different than those that received greater than $5 million. One thing that I don't have clarity on yet is they keep using the word received and not reserved. So if your total amount was 5 million, you applied for it and they gave you your first half payment, you have not received 5 million. So I don't know where you fit in that reporting requirements, but I'm sure US Treasury will send out the ticklers and let you know how and when and to what level you'll need to report based on the money received. The important part is this: if you received the money, regardless of whether you've spent a dime of it or not, if you've received it, you have a compliance report due by the end of August. And if you haven't spent anything, that compliance report at the end of August can just simply state no money expended. But anybody that's received their direct allocation has to submit a report by the end of August. I'd like to know from you entities if you are getting federal ticklers. The Fed grant process is usually pretty good about being progressively annoying and reminding you that you have compliance reporting due. I'd like to see examples of those if you get them, just so we can share them with other folks that are out there that might be waiting. Our goal will be to make sure that we don't have any issues in non-compliance with the first reporting requirements until we can either get Treasury to have a better understanding of reporting, loosen up requirements on reporting, or modify the reporting so it's easier for everybody to accomplish. If you've received money, you have to file a report by the end of August. That's the takeaway. There have been questions, most recently in the last couple of weeks, about potential subrecipients. And the question at hand that I'd like to discuss today is the Hutterite colonies. If you have one, you probably have been approached by your colonies about applying on their behalf or helping them become available for the competitive grant or the reserved grant allocations in House Bill 632. Either there's a misunderstanding or there's been some conflicting information that's been passing around county to county. Yeah. When MACo staff first looked at the eligibility for a colony to go after competitive grant pot funding in House Bill 632, it didn't appear that they met any definition of local government. And so while a water or wastewater project on a Hutterite colony is eligible in terms of the expenditure for water and wastewater, the avenue to seek those funds isn't for them to directly apply for the competitive grant. If you wanted to, as a county, sponsor their application, it's conceivable that you can do that. And we would put all those cautions in place by saying, first consult with your county attorney and figure out how you're going to enter into a formal agreement, memorandum of understanding, or contract, so that the performance and the requirements associated with giving that money over to a private entity can be shared, at least a shared responsibility with any subrecipient agreements. As of this morning, the folks that are running the 632 program are saying that Hutterite colonies are not directly eligible for the competitive grant program. I've been told that there's been some information where they've told them that they were and that they could apply directly. And as of this morning, that's not the case. Here, and this isn't about Hutterite colonies, this is about any of your subrecipients. The other part that was clarified to me by the state is that they consider the state as the direct recipient, and anybody they give it to in the competitive process or the minimum allocation grants as subrecipients, and that all the recruitment, the procurement, public bidding, architectural and engineering, all of the requirements for competitive bidding and procurement follow subrecipients. Okay? Prevailing wage, all of the requirements for procurement, public procurement, follow to subrecipients. That's to say that if you do sponsor an application for a colony or a private party to do a project that could be a water and wastewater project, it would likely have to be competitively bid. You would have to get the architectural and engineering services done. You'd have to follow the thresholds for purchases. You treat it like a public contract, and the state's going to expect that of you, and you need to expect that of subrecipients in most cases. George, is your hand up asking a question? Or not? I'm going to pause there just so we can get into some discussion about this, what it means to be subrecipients, and specifically if you have questions about colonies. Nobody. Wow, quiet group.
Hey, Eric, my question isn't on that, but where do we find this 26-page application for the minimum allocation grants?
ARPA.mt.gov. I'm going to put that in the chat box. ARPA, ARPA.mt.gov, and that will take you to, they've got it laid out really well. In fact, I'll just share my screen. Let's do that.
Eric, while you're doing that, I guess I'm a little confuzzled on the question of the Hutterite colonies, since they are registered public utility districts.
So treat them as it stands right now, first consult with your county attorney, but treat them like a private entity. So it doesn't matter. You could have a public water supply system in a private building. You could have a senior center home that's run by a third party, its own 503 or nonprofit entity that still has required a public water system that you could supposedly fund. Same thing for a colony. Think of it as a private entity that might have some public infrastructure. And until either the state changes or your county attorney tells you differently.
Yeah, it's just a little strange, given that another part of the state requires them to be considered a public entity. But
I would say it's sort of, well, it's not similar, but it would be, I'll leave it at that. They will be interesting to see how the state sorts those out going forward.
yeah, because we did get a visit from a colony yesterday while we were trying to wrap up the letters of endorsement for the various projects.
This is new within the last 10 days, and the colonies must have a great way of coordinating with each other, because all of a sudden they're all coming and asking for either support, endorsement, or access to your ARPA funds.
Yep.
The important part, the reason that I bring up the competitive bidding and the prevailing wage portions of it, is that will be a requirement of those public projects, and that might be difficult. If not, that might be one of the negotiating points that the colonies won't agree to. So then if that's the case, and you still want to sponsor because it's a worthwhile investment, then the county needs to take the position that you're the project manager. So you're doing it to them at their request, rather than handing the money over to them for them to do. Anyway, we are at the state Montana ARPA website. This is arpa.mt.gov. You can see all the different options that are available. And if you just click on the local government section here on the right-hand side, it takes you to process for submitting requests. I'm going to get back out of here first. Hold on. You can get to it the same way a couple different ways, but let's just go water and sewer, because that's what we're interested in talking about. There's general information. Are you interested in the competitive grant program or the minimum allocation grant program? This is the minimum allocation is the one that's set aside by jurisdiction. Competitive grant is the one that we just talked about. So if you want to get your minimum allocation grant, click on that. Applications are due but open July 15th through January 1st. You can separate out if you want to talk about a qualifying water project here or a sewer project here, but you start a generic application. It's got links to House Bill 632, ARPA.mt. If you need help, there is some assistance that's available. Some guidelines. See if it'll let me into the application. That's not gonna let me do that. So this is the application for cities and towns to have received their money. This isn't relevant to you either. Let me get out of that.
While Eric is doing that, you guys may want to just think in general about tactics of how you want to go about this. We are having everybody go through the competitive side for grants. We're not going to allocate any of the minimum allocation dollars until we see what happens out of the competitive grants, because the match requirements are exactly the same. The difference is it's non-competitive within your county for the funds that are set aside for you. So use those for the projects that didn't get funded through the competitive side or things that aren't going to score well.
Good advice.
A lot of confusion on that. Every bloody thing we got put in for the minimum allocation. And so we had to change all of those yesterday and swing them to where we were using our normal ARPA funds for the matches rather than committing the minimums allocation.
So this is the summary document I was looking for. This is the water and sewer grant application guidelines. It's got the definition of local government. We've talked about that at length. Award time. First round are due by July 15th. One of the things I forgot to mention before is that there's every expectation of more openings for rounds. I do think DNRC and the state wanted to see what they would get in the first round of applications, but all of their documents reference additional openings. So we'll keep you posted on what those timelines look like. They want to get it to the advisory commission by August 15th for that rank prioritization. And that's the time that I want you, if you have applications out there, to pay attention and attend those meetings for that scoring process. It's a pass-fail system, essentially, in terms of eligibility and whether that's an allowable project. This is the section talking about your minimum allocation grants that the state set aside $150 million and then broke it out based on the gas tax allocation formula. And again, it has the advisory commission still set to make a recommendation on funding the authorized projects. You know, we did comment that says that if you're going to set aside a certain dollar amount, just make it a simple process, well, similar to what Treasury did, and just cut you a check for your portion of it and make you certify that you will spend it in accordance with Treasury guidance. We're not successful on that discussion, so you have this process which looks like a grant for your minimum eligibility. Again, you get to this page from that arpa.mt.gov. The document itself is called American Rescue Plan Infrastructure Advisory Commission Application Guidelines. Should tell you everything you need to do. And again, like Commissioner Briggs said, your ability to prioritize what you're going to sponsor or endorse for competitive versus minimum allocation, knowing that your direct federal treasury is an allowable match for either one of those, is what you guys get to wrestle with. So, questions? Stop sharing.
Eric, there are a couple questions in the chat. I'm not sure if they've been covered or not.
I've not read them, so let me look. Daniels County pledged money to the town of Flaxville for their water projects. Are we considered sponsors? You are considered recipients. So even if you did your application jointly, Daniels County, correct me, are you talking about your minimum allocation dollars? Is that a nod from Daniels? I didn't hear
Yes.
anything.
Yeah, they typed in yes.
So you are on the hook for the reporting and compliance portions of it that the state will set up. You will still be considered a subrecipient. So even if you're just acting as a pass-through and handing that money off, whether it's to a private entity or a city or town, make sure that you follow the reporting requirements. And best practices, sign an MOU, get an agreement in place between the county and or whoever else is going to be the recipient to make sure that you can compel them to give you the financial information you need and the reporting information that you need, because if not, the state will hold you responsible for that, for your share. For subrecipient monitoring, has the state given any expectations of what they'll require? Only in terms of telling me that they consider the subrecipients to be saddled with the same requirements that the state is saddling to you, and that they consider you to be subrecipients of any money received through House Bill 630. I'll interpret that in English. All the public procurement requirements are in place for you and maybe anybody that you give it to under you. The formula, and I think the guidelines talk about this, they want the application process, compliance reporting over a, I think, yet to be identified period of time, and then a completion report when all the money's been expended, or if there's remaining funds to be turned back over to them. So it'll be a regular reporting format. Did I miss anything? And then just because the question was asked, don't get confused between your federal reporting requirements and whatever the state might require you to do through their 2 pots of money and the federal's 1 pot of money. So if you have a competitive grant that you received and your minimum allocation grant that you received from the state and your treasury money, that's 3 different reports and reporting mechanisms that you're going to have to comply with that likely blended at least 2 sources of those funds. So be really good about tracking. Well, Dan, I'm sending it back over to you then.
Great, Eric, thanks. And hopefully everyone had their questions answered. As I mentioned, this is being recorded. It'll take about an hour for the recording to be rendered. They'll send us an email link, and then we will post that on our website at msulocalgov.org, and we'll send it on to MACo, and then someone will post it on their website. I'm not sure, Eric, on your end, how quickly that can be done, but if you want to listen to this recording again later on, you can probably access that on our website probably after 2 or 3 o'clock this afternoon.
Dan, can I just address that last question really fast?
Yes, go ahead.
Question was about administrative costs and are they allowable expenses? They're allowable expenses in almost all of the categories. I want to talk specifically about your direct allocation to Treasury because they're clearly allowable. And there are examples back from the National Association of Counties. So we talked to our colleagues across the country, and there are examples of pretty formal systems being put in place by either state associations or states themselves, hiring third-party entities, auditing firms, large, big-scale auditing companies to do some of the tracking and compliance monitoring and pre-authorization stuff that we were able to do for CARES Act, but aren't able to do because you're direct recipients of Treasury money. So you could hire, now we're always, if you ask us a question, we're telling you, consult with your county attorney and check with your auditors. You could even conceivably hire a third party to do a review of proposed expenditures to make sure that you would be in compliance with what the feds have issued as a preliminary rule, which will likely be similar to final rule as an administrative cost. What it doesn't appear you can do is have a formula, a very formal indirect cost rate and carve out a portion of your direct federal money, but you could justify and document reasonable administrative costs, even including consultation on allowable expenses as one of your allowable expenses. Now it's yours, Dan.
Great. Thank you. Any last call for questions or comments before we close today?
Thanks and happy Friday, everyone.
Thank you, everyone. We'll see you in a few weeks. We'll send you a note when we're going to be doing this again. Have a great weekend.
Yeah.
Dan, do you want to hit the end recording so we can start rendering?
There we go. Thank you.